And welcome into Facebook Live for this Press Box Live edition. And it's brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. Welcome in on this Monday evening. I'm Stan the Fan Charles of Press Box and PressBoxOnline.com. With me is co-host Ross Grimsley. And before we introduce the other man on the screen, I'll just take a second, Ross. We're going to do something Wednesday night, a little bit of a tribute show to Mel Antonin, who we lost over the weekend. But I know you sat near him for a couple of years out at the ballpark and got fairly friendly with Mel.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a shock. I knew he'd been sick, but yeah, so many people we've lost over this past year. It's been really tragic. But Mel, I mean, what a nice guy, and he was always courteous and talkative, and just really made you feel at home. I started doing the pregame show with 105.7 with Bob Haney, and we would go up to the press box. The first time actually I'd been in the press box, and he was very cordial and sat next to us, and it was always fun to be around and listen to him, and he would ask questions, and we'd ask questions about different things to him. But yeah, it's so sad, and really feel bad for his family, and our thoughts and prayers go out to them.
Same here, and I'll have more to talk about Mel on Wednesday night when we're going to have Peter Schmuck, Bob Nightingale, Glenn Clark's going to co-host with me, and then we'll have some other guests as well. But joining us tonight, and I would have included him, but I know he only met him very briefly, is MLB.com's Baltimore Orioles beat reporter, and that is Joe Trezza. Joe, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Good to be here.
Absolutely.
Hey, Joe, you did us a big favor today. Rather than make it a boring day, you got the Orioles making a trade that hasn't officially been announced. Alex Cobb to, it appears, Mike Elias's favorite trading partner, Perry Minasian, the new general manager of the Los Angeles Angels. Orioles get back a surprisingly decent prospect, although an aging one. Tell us a little bit about the trade in your eyes, Joe.
Yeah, well, sometimes you wake up on a Monday morning and there's news that keeps you busy all day, right? And that was what today was. And I think it should be said up front that this deal is not official yet. We've reported that they're in the works, that the Orioles are finalizing this deal. It's kind of a complicated trade because of all the money that's going back and forth. Alex Cobb is owed $15 million in 2021 salary, with $4.5 million or so that's deferred money. And so there's a lot of money changing hands here. It does seem like the Orioles are going to pay a decent amount of that, while also getting some financial relief as well, along with the prospect that you mentioned. It does seem like a one-for-one player deal at this point, but again, nothing finalized. There are things that need to be approved. There are medicals that still need to go down. So it's an interesting day. What strikes me about this trade more than anything else is that it's kind of one of these modern, like buying a prospect type deals that rebuilding teams are doing now. I think you saw the Giants do one a few years ago with Christian Arroyo. There have been a few other examples. And so what the Orioles are going to do here, if it gets finalized and it happens, is they unload a veteran that they'd been willing to deal for some time, and whose cost was probably prohibitive last year before he proved that he was healthy, especially at the trade deadline for what might have been like a rental situation. And what they get is an interesting prospect, but that they have to, eat some salary for. So it's essentially they're buying a prospect.
I view it, Joe, as they're buying the prospect, Jahmai Jones, Jahmi Jones, who has some connections to DeMatha High School. His father graduated from DeMatha High School back in, I think, the 60s. But anyway, I view it that they're getting the prospect, but I also think it's going to buy them an upside of an inexpensive veteran pitcher that they're still going to add. I'm all in. My chips are in for wanting Colin McHugh. I don't know who it's going to be, but I'll bet out of this they get a veteran pitcher much like Alex Cobb, but one that's making vastly different money for like $2 million.
Right. And that's the next question. It's like, after this gets finalized, what's next? I think the Orioles, if they sign at least one pitcher to a major league deal, they probably add one or two more depth pieces on minor league contracts. Maybe it's Colin McHugh, maybe it's another one of these guys. There's a lot of options, but I like to look at last year's comps, and I look at Wade LeBlanc or Tommy Malone. And there are two different kind of results there.
Plus, you got a couple for Joe Trezza?
Yeah, I was just curious. You see the Orioles. They're cutting salary, and they do it every year. How much longer is this going to go? Who's next? Mancini. He's 28 years old, going to be 29, and he's making what, $4.5 million. Is he the next guy in line? If he comes on and has a pretty good year, can we look for them to deal him? Obviously, if the price is right.
I think the pandemic really slowed down the rebuilding timeline. I think that's the big takeaway here. So I'm not sure about your direct question, but I think to answer it, you need to ask yourself, when do you think the Orioles will be serious contenders? If it's 2 or 3 years down the road, maybe Trey Mancini factors into those plans. Excuse me, 1 second.
That's all right. That's one of the things you always have to worry about with Zoom videos.
Sorry, I had a computer talking to me.
That's all right.
But if the window of contention doesn't seriously open until 3, 4, 5 years down the road, then this idea of signing Trey Mancini to an extension, or Anthony Santander to an extension, doesn't make all that much sense from a long-term view. So I think if there wasn't a pandemic and last year's season wasn't shortened, we'd have kind of a clearer picture of that. But it still kind of remains to be seen what 2020 did, not only to the on-field product or to the long-term plans, but what it did to the development timeline for a lot of these major prospects, including a guy like Adley Rutschman, big headliner, right? He's a guy who, if he had a full year last year in the minor leagues, you're probably a pretty good bet to debut this season at some point. Now that's a much more complicated discussion. So I think 2021 is going to be reflective of a lot, and we're not really sure how yet, not only with rebuilding teams like the Orioles in terms of what is their new timeline, but even teams who were expecting to be competitive this year, how much can they rely on all these pitchers who didn't really pitch that much, last year? How much is depth going to be a factor? How much is durability going to be a factor? There are all these question marks that are kind of lingering from last year. And I think it plays into the conversation of, do they trade another really big piece, or does it end with Alex Cobb, who's kind of like the last veteran left from the old regime that, had any kind of trade value whatsoever?
Well, when do you think that you'll see the Orioles start making moves? How do I put this? To put a competitive team on the field that can play day in and day. And I know the COVID, it started out a 5-year plan. Then the next year it was a 5-year plan. And obviously now with COVID, and even this year with the fact that you don't know when the season is going to start, when spring training is going to, don't even know the rules yet, what some of the rules are going to be. The minor league situation, I don't think anybody knows that. Do you have any idea of any of those questions I asked? Anything at all? Do you have any idea or any feel for any of that?
I think the simple answer is that they're going to start adding pieces rather than subtracting them when they have actually identified which of these young players they're going to be building around at the big league level. So right now there's a lot of names and the system's highly ranked, and there's a lot of excitement and optimism about some of these players. But if you have 15 guys you're really excited about, even if they're highly touted, there's a chance only that 5 of them are really players that you build around, and then you need to supplement. But at this point,
that's a lot.
Yeah,
That'd be a lot of guys.
That would be a lot. Yeah.
Really.
And right now there's really just one that's in the big leagues, and he's got maybe 25 games of big league experience under his belt, and that's Ryan Mountcastle. He came up and looks like a guy to build around. So I think, he has to keep that going, and then they need 3 or 4 of those other prospects to come up and show that they are that kind of guy also. And then you can really talk about, when are they going to supplement this group? When are they going to go out and buy and add? When does it make sense?
We're talking.
Let me ask you one more question. With talking about Mountcastle, and that's Where does he play? Obviously, he improved greatly in left field. Probably going to be a first baseman eventually. But then you got Mancini, who is a first baseman and an outfielder. Just hypothetically, if Chris Davis starts hitting, what do you do with him?
What do you do with Chris Davis, or what do you do
Yeah,
with
if he
Ryan
starts
Mountcastle?
hitting, which I mean that's hypothetical. I know the chances are so if that happens. But if he starts hitting, do you play him? Or
They,
or
they
Let me
were
just let me
they were
just jump
playing him
in.
when he didn't hit. So I think if
oh,
he
I
hits, you
know.
play him.
I mean that's different now because you got Mountcastle and Mancini.
Hey, Ross, let me just throw this in. Maybe sports betting will be legal in Maryland, and you'll be able to. You could start betting on the Orioles if Chris Davis hits.
No,
Yeah,
look, to answer your question, Ross, I think they really like Mountcastle in left field today a lot more than they did a year ago.
yeah,
Um, I think he showed them not only at the alternate site but at the big league level that he's more than capable out there, just in terms of holding his own. He's probably never going to be an impact defender, but this guy is way more athletic than we heard about,
yeah,
especially even just running down the line. His sprint speed is above average. He was kind of billed as this, Mancini type lumbering right-handed slugger, but he's not. He's got more quickness than Trey did. He has more. Just has more speed and athleticism, and I think that's what's allowed him to play left field in a capable way. And I think Santander plays right, and I think Trey Mancini plays first base. In a perfect world, and without Renato Nunez, you don't have as much of a positional logjam as you might have maybe 3
yeah.
months ago or so.
Joe, getting back to Ryan Mountcastle for a second, I'm taking it that you hadn't seen a lot of him or even any of him playing minor league baseball, but you had read the same things that I read and Ross read. I was absolutely stunned at how much better plate discipline he had than I was led to believe from the numbers and looking at the simple ratios of strikeouts to walks. What do you attribute that to?
Look, he's a guy who struck me with his aggressiveness at the plate, but also he was also measured in the box. He made really good swing decisions, but it was almost like if you didn't pay attention and you just looked at him swing, he looked like a really aggressive guy because he
Yeah.
swung so hard. It's such a max effort swing. There's like a real modern style there where it's almost comparable to these relief pitchers throwing 100 miles an hour. Every pitch is max effort. With Ryan Mountcastle, every swing is max effort. And we've seen some really good modern players, especially on teams like the Dodgers and the Rays, like really good teams have kind of perfected this, walked this fine line between aggressiveness and plate discipline and made it really work in a way that 10 years ago, 15 years ago wasn't that common. So that's what struck me with his approach at the plate. He impressed me with his ability to recognize the breaking ball, and he impressed me with his just his pure aggression, with the way he attacked fastballs in the zone, and the way that he he looked like he came up here to hit, and he came up to stay, and that really impressed me.
Ross, I got to ask you a question. I know Joe's our guest, but can the difference between the lighting at, say, double A and triple A and then the big leagues, can that explain a little bit why a hitter might do better? That he just seeing the ball better under the lights in the big leagues?
Yeah, the big league lights are obviously better, but they've improved at the minor league level. The minor league level and what was said while they got rid of 42 teams, there's some of the stadiums are they're not as bad as they've been led to believe. Now, so obviously some of them are because I've seen most of them, and the lighting in some of them is pretty good. Some of it is bad, and obviously, yeah, you could go to the big leagues and it's probably easier to hit in the big leagues because the pitchers are around the plate
Yeah.
or have been around the plate in the big leagues because you got your better pitchers there and the better command. But yeah, it could help, and obviously it's a little bit easier. But I think Mountcastle, from everybody I talked to that was around him, this guy could hit. Yeah. And just be a little bit more patient at the back. I think you're going to see him even improve more. By doing things like that. But he is somebody that is very special as far as hitting wise, and he should get better.
Joe,
I,
let me
I
turn.
agree. I mean, we heard a lot last year about what Mountcastle couldn't do, actually, for the last 2 years.
Yep.
And that might have had a little more to do with service time than we were led to believe, because this is a guy who's hit everywhere. And he was coming out of the draft. He was a really good hitter. And he hasn't just hit a little bit in the minor leagues. He hit a lot. And there were really no questions at all about his hit ability. And, could he maybe draw a few more walks? Yeah, but a lot of that comes with maturity. And he was a pretty young high school kid anyway when he got drafted. So I think there's a case to be made that if he, had a little bit of AAA time last year, you would have seen all that stuff really improve on the stat sheet. And because he really wasn't overmatched or even overwhelmed at all at the big league level. And that doesn't mean that next year he doesn't run into some adjustment periods or have a little bit of a slump. He's going to have that, I think. But I think the foundation there, the hit foundation is real. And you talk to a lot of people, and the consensus is that that's pretty legit.
Let me turn to a different area of the ball club, because I think time will tell when Rutschman, Kierstad, Mountcastle, Santander, and a few others round out the everyday lineup. But it's really what's going to separate the Orioles from being able to contend is pitching. And I want to know what you've gleaned in hearing about Chris Holt, talking to him. What do you think what kind of difference can this guy make within the organization?
I think you've seen the difference, or part of it already, that he's made in 3 years. He's got a very commanding presence. He has a very modern perspective, and he's fluent in analytics, and not only in understanding the data, but being able to kind of translate it to players, and how to stay on kind of ahead of the curve with that stuff, and cake it into everything that they do, to where even if the numbers and those philosophies are new to certain guys who come into the system, which is actually pretty uncommon these days, because these are perspectives that are pretty widespread across baseball now. But even if they are, it becomes so routine and so caked into the daily vernacular and language and drills and philosophies of what they do, that it's not taboo. It just becomes part of the organization's philosophy. And their training methods. And Chris Holt is really, really fluent, not only in the numbers, but he knows a lot about the physical technology, and he knows how to show pitchers how it's helping them. And then he's also really good at kind of giving them the tools to then see it, like when they do start struggling with something, how to use the technology to identify the next way it can help them. And I think you've heard that from a lot of these prospects, from Dean Kramer, who was exposed to a lot of this stuff in the Dodgers system, to guys like Zach Lowther, who were already in the Orioles system and didn't have it before Chris Holt came. And then, 3 years later, they're talking about how Chris Holt helped them improve a singular pitch so much, or improve in a certain skill in a big way. And you've kind of seen that across the board. But he also has a really commanding presence, and players really trust him, and they really respond to him.
Ross?
Joe, let me ask you a question about, starting pitching in baseball. It's something that's been put on the back burner, so to speak. You get your starters, they go, 100 pitches, and I don't know where that came from, but anyway, 100 pitches, that usually is around the fourth inning, because pitch counts are up, pitches to hitters are up. It used to be, get hitters out 3 pitches or less, and now it's almost over 4, doing things like that. My question is, especially with the Orioles, are you seeing the Orioles? Are they making a run at trying to get starters to go deeper into games? Because I know throwing 100 pitches, not many Orioles starters, none last year, but the year before, I think there was only 22 that threw 100 pitches or more. My question is, obviously, are the Orioles addressing the starting pitching issues? Because they haven't developed a starting pitcher since, I think, Messina.
I think overall that's something that they would like to see happen at the big league level. And just a guy who comes to mind is someone like Keegan Aiken. He had a few electric starts last year when he came up in his little cameo. He also had some very inefficient starts where he couldn't get out of the first inning, other ones where he kind of languished in the fourth and the third inning. for individual guys, yeah, that's going to be the message. If they struggle with that, that's something that they want guys to improve on. But I think overall, from a philosophy perspective, like you're still seeing the emphasis more on missing bats and limiting walks than you are with pitching to contact or developing kind of like wide-ranging repertoires. And like if a guy has two really good pitches and two bad ones, the instinct is going to be to eliminate those bad ones and make the good ones better, not necessarily to improve the other two that aren't so good. And that's kind of across the game right now. The philosophy is to improve what you're good at and to get really, really good at as many things as you can. And there are enough players and there's enough specialization in the game to where you see how the good teams essentially make everyone a role player. They work with basically 40-man rosters. The Dodgers, a few years ago, it seemed like they had a 40-man roster in the playoffs because the whole roster was so hyper specialized. And you see it more on the pitching side than on the position player side. So I don't know if if the curve's kind of gotten back around that way yet on the pitching side, but I do kind of see it on the position player side where you see the Orioles in the prospects that they're targeting. Swing and misses are way up, strikeouts are way up. You're seeing them go after prospects who can hit instead of just hit for power. They're starting to realize that I think the game's gone a certain way and it's gotten so far that way that the next market inefficiency is going to be in kind of getting it back to putting balls in play and making things happen, at least more so than you see now in the game. So I do think that they're doing that a little bit on the position player side. There are a few guys that come to mind that they've acquired. They've made choices to acquire these prospects over other ones. And especially when you look through the system, it's a pretty highly ranking system right now. There really isn't that much like light tower power in it. Most of the position players, besides Adley Rutschman, that are very highly touted, are kind of all around players. They're all around hitters. And so I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but
No,
but you made me think of that.
That makes a lot of sense. And the reason I asked that, I know you look over the last 10 years, and the teams that usually win the World Series are the teams that have the best starting pitching. And you could probably go back 20 years and see that. Obviously, Tampa Bay got there this year with the way they do things, and they stuck with the analytics, and it very well could have cost them the World Series, with the thing with Snell. So, but anyway, I just you do answer it, but I was just curious.
Yeah, look, on the pitching side, they would love to get the most out of those guys every night, I think, and they are developing starters. They are emphasizing on developing starting pitching. I think that's one of the main attributes of the system is its starting pitching depth. But overall, the game is trending in a way that's like, and it has been for a while, and it still is going that way where, you don't necessarily need every starter to go 7 or 8 every night to be a successful team. For every Blake Snell example, you can look at, the Dodgers use more relievers than anybody, and they have for years too. Dave Roberts has been, like infamous for walking to the mound so much.
They got some big time talent too.
Right? Yeah.
If I was an organization, I would send my scouts to follow the Dodger scouts around because they get some tremendous players. How they do it, I don't know. But
the Orioles are doing some other things on the development side now that kind of mirror what the Dodgers have done the last few years also, especially when it comes to versatility. And I know that's a big buzzword and every team says they need versatility, and it's just kind of a basic tenet of the game now. But what the Dodgers did was they, most teams move around their players who aren't good at one position. What the Dodgers did was they moved around their best athletes. So Cody Bellinger was their best player. And one year he played center field, next year he played first base. They move around their stars on the development level. And the Orioles are starting to do that now too. They've moved Gunnar Henderson all around the field over the last 2 years since they came in. He's one of their most exciting prospects. Same with a guy like Jordan Westberger this year, who they really, really like. So anybody who's athletic and, who's got a lot of upside, they're saying, yeah, you could play short. We know you can do that already. Go see if you could play third and go see if you can play center field too. Not because you can't play short, because we want a team eventually a contending team of, where every position player can play anywhere. That's where the game is trending. And the Orioles they may not look like they're on the cutting edge of that at the big league level, but they're definitely putting that kind of emphasis on their work on the development side.
This guy that they picked up in the Cobb trade, when it gets completed, Jami Jones, apparently they like him because of his versatility, that he can play the middle infield positions and the outfield.
He was a center fielder, Stan.
Yeah.
So center fielders or shortstops can usually play just about anywhere.
Right.
They're your best athletes.
Yeah, Jones comes from a really athletic family. I think his father and his two brothers, I think, were professional football players. So
Yep.
I think he began his career as an outfielder. He became more of a second baseman 2 years ago, and he played mostly there. He's viewed more as a second baseman now, but a guy who can move around, play center, play the corner outfield spots if possible. More of that profile than a shortstop profile for him specifically. But the versatility certainly is something the Orioles are looking for. And I think that gives him a chance to make an impact this year at the big league level.
Joe, we've got limited time. Don't want to keep you too long, but and this might seem like I'm splitting hairs, but going back to the winter baseball meetings, even though they were virtual this year, building up to them, it was about a week before they started that you had to protect the guys that you wanted to make sure nobody took as a Rule 5 guy. And if I'm not mistaken, Chris Shaw today was sort of pushed off the 40-man roster. And about 2 weeks ago, Austin Wynns went off the 40-man roster. Hanser Alberto went off the 40-man roster. He's now signed with Kansas City. But there were 3 or 4 guys that they kept on the 40-man roster and protected. And Zach Pop got taken, who was, I think, an electric prospect before his Tommy John injury. Do you see that, what I'm complaining about a little bit, that they kept some people back at that time that they haven't even kept even to spring training?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of those guys, like Shaw especially, and he entered the organization, I believe, after Renato Nunez was released.
Right.
So that was right after that deadline. That was after the 40-man stuff. But
Okay,
a few other guys like Shaw, who I think that they were hoping they could pass through waivers at some point and keep in the organization. But those other moves, like the Hanser Alberto thing, I think was more about finances than anything else. And with a guy like Zach Pop, there were discussions about whether or not, he was kind of a bubble guy, and they were kind of banking on the fact that nobody's seen him pitch in 2 years, basically 2.5 years. So they were hoping that, a team wouldn't take a chance on him. And they were already protecting 6 guys, which was a pretty big prospect 40-man class. So I think more of the surprise was actually that Gray Fenter got taken in the Rule 5. And
yeah, that was
but because of the pandemic and the finances that a lot of financial situations a lot of teams are in, teams were really active in the Rule 5 draft this year. A lot of rebuilding teams looked at it as an easy way to get some cheap talent and take some flyers on some guys. And so I know teams are going to say that they can't protect everybody, and they were kind of hoping Zach Pop, I think, flew under the radar a little bit more.
I want to get your take on what this season's going to look like aesthetically from a Major League Baseball perspective. Before I ask you that, I wanted to ask you one other question, and it just went out of my head. So I'm gonna close. I have that happen now at the advanced years I am.
Listen to you.
Yeah, the advanced years. So tell me what you think this season's going to look like. And if that other question comes back into my mind, I'll ask it. Is it going to be 162 games? Is it going to be 140? Is it going to be 150? Where do you think this is all going to play out? And when are we going to see Major League Baseball start the 2021 season?
I'm not sure about those answers, Stan. Those things happen way above me, but I do think that everyone's going to try to play as much baseball as possible in a very general sense. You heard GMs talk about it as far back as the winter meetings. They think the season's going to be longer and fuller than it was last year. and that, I think both the league and players learned a lot of lessons last year. Teams did how to play safely. And I think there's going to be a continuation of that, but on a bigger scale, although I can't tell you anything more than already has been reported, because I'm waiting, to hear just as much as anybody else.
All right. That other question popped back into my head. That's how it works when you get my age, Joe. This past season, these pitchers pitched so few innings. Is this going to be like a 2-year process to build pitchers' innings back up, or even maybe 2.5 years before they can jump from 57 innings up to 157 this year or 180? What do you think?
I think it's going to be one of the biggest on-field stories of 2021 is going to be how teams manage their pitching depth, how they figure out how much they can push guys, how many innings they get from certain types of pitchers versus other ones, how much turnover there is on the roster, what the injury repercussions are for the increase in workload. I think teams are still trying to figure it out. And it's something that every team is going to grapple with starting as soon as they get to spring training. And they're really kind of going in blind because there is no kind of historical precedent in terms of workload from year to year that they can look to. And it's also going to be something that is a situation that's fluid, I think, for every single team. You might have a team that shows up with a great plan on the first day of spring training, and you might see 2 guys get hurt the first week of spring training in a way that, it doesn't happen for another team, where yes, that happens every spring, but now it's kind of comes with this backdrop that's very different than normal. So I don't know. I think that depth and I think that durability is going to be a major factor for every team, especially the contending ones. But I also think it's why, to go back to Ross's question from a little while ago, that you're not going to see teams really emphasize, I need a complete game from my starter tonight. I need 8 innings every 5th day. That mindset was kind of on its way out already. And now I think just like the physical reality of what this season's going to look like is going to make it so that teams aren't even going to consider that kind of thing. They're going to need depth and they're going to need fresh arms.
Ross, you and I have done we've done about 50 of these Zoom videos together with guests. And tonight I'm asking you 2 questions because I asked you one before. I want to ask you the same question. How do you think teams, because you pitched in the big leagues for 14 or 15 years, you coached in the minor leagues for that many years, how difficult a task is this going to be to start growing these arms back to where they can throw a reasonable amount of innings this season?
Yeah, no, it's really it's hard because there's so many different variables involved. You're going to have to, and the way they use the 40-man roster, that's very important too. But I mean, last year, spring training is for the pitchers. 6 weeks, you got to have it. You build your arm up until the end, and then you're still building it up as the season begins. Well, they cut spring training off last year with what a week and a half left or 2 weeks left in spring training. They shut it down for 2.5 months, and then they had a very short spring training. And we said on the show, I said, it's too soon. There's going to be guys. There were at one point last year there were 200 pitchers that weren't pitching. So you had guys in the big leagues that would never have gotten an opportunity if it wasn't for those injuries. So it's a power game now. Power throwing, power swinging. I mean, that's something that I did want to ask Joe about what his thoughts. I'll get to that in a minute. But
all right, go ahead.
The pitchers have to. I mean, you got to take your time and make sure you're ready. Being a power guys, you can't just do it all at once, or you'll end up having injuries like they had last year. But it's something that, and everybody's different.
But in a shortened way, if a guy threw 57 innings last year, what do you see the max he could throw this in?
Well, everybody's different. I mean, you're not going to see that anymore because the guys, we pitched 300 innings, 298. Some guys threw more. some last year out there for, hell, I threw 14 innings one night in 74. And then two starts later, I threw 11. Wasn't a power guy. That's a little bit different. You pitched. Guys don't pitch now; they throw more so throwing than pitching. So it's really hard to say. But I think pitchers don't. Starting pitchers go under 5 innings a start now on average. So yeah, can the guys? They're not going to get innings because they don't do that. They depend on bullpens, and that's how the game is progressed.
All right, did you have one more for Joe, and then we'll let him get out?
No,
Before we wrap this up, I think we're going to see six-man
rotations.
Yeah,
I think that's an easy solution that a lot of teams are going to try to implement.
Great
maybe
point.
even
That's a
more,
great
maybe
point.
even 6-man rotations with some swingmen at the end of it.
Yeah.
Both will go back and forth.
Yeah. But one of the things I want to ask, over the years, last 10 years, 12 years, attendance in major leagues has went down, viewing has went down. And a lot of it is because of not the length of the games, it's the flow of the game. My question is, with the way the game is, home run, baseball ball, strikeout, people are bored. Is it ever going to get back where there's, and honestly, there's less strategy in the game now. You think it will ever get back to that? Because they're going to have to do something to get the fans interested in the game again. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're right in a lot of ways. I think the phrase that gets thrown around a lot, pace of play, is actually kind of a misleading phrase. It's more about rate of action. It's about balls that get put in play. It's about the lack of dead time. And I think that velocity is the main root of the game. I think the players are getting too big for the field, and that the hitting's just become too hard when everyone throws max effort at every pitch. And that's how the strategy is going too, right? And I do think that you're seeing hints of it on, which I said earlier, on the position player side, where you're seeing some at the prospect level, you're seeing contact valued a little more because it's such a scarce commodity now at the big league level, that you're starting to see teams kind of target it a little more than they were definitely 5 years ago, but even more like 3 and 2 years ago. And so when I look to the future a little bit and project, like, that's what I look at. And I think that, okay, I'm not sure if it will happen because I don't know if pitchers are going to start throwing less hard. I mean, you're just seeing velocities go up past numbers that we ever, thought they can even get at. And if you look at the way guys are training at places like Driveline or whatever, it's like they're just finding new ways to kind of throw harder and get guys to throw harder.
And go in the hospital more and get operations. That's
maybe
at younger ages.
But I don't see that trend ending. So I only think it happens if teams or organizations do a lot to counter it on the other end, and start valuing that like contact-based skill set and that all-around skill set in their position players a little more. And I am seeing kind of hints of that on an anecdotal level, especially with the Orioles. So
yes,
not sure,
really.
but definitely something that I think is worth keeping an eye on.
Joe Trezza of MLB.com. We appreciate your spending some time with us. Hope you get to Sarasota if you want to get there, or we'll see you around town when the season opens. We appreciate your time a great deal.
Joe. Thank you so much.
I'm sure I'll see you guys soon. Thanks again.
Hey, Press Box Live has been brought to you tonight by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. And Ross, speaking of that pitching issue, we'll have both Dave Johnson and his son Steve Johnson on with us next week to talk about those very issues and the new facility they've opened up in the Bel Air area. Hope you'll join us then. I'll be back Wednesday night with Glenn Clark, and we're going to do a special tribute show in honor of the late Mel Antonin. Thank you for stopping in tonight. And thanks to C3 American Exteriors. Good night, everybody.